psychotherapy. Yeah, and it is also just a little bit of the background, the history. It was founded in 1970 as an international society, and the Asian Area Affiliate Group was formed at the end of 2022. So it is actually the newest area affiliate of the SPR, and we are really hoping to expand it and get more people interested in this organization because we really feel like there's a great need for psychotherapy research and collaboration among different Asian countries in terms of researchers and practitioners and students. So hopefully we will do that through the different events that we organize, as well as for the newsletter that we're going to send out as part of the association. So today we are really delighted to have this roundtable on cultural adaptation of psychotherapy. And before we start, I'm going to introduce to you the different panelists for today. We have Professor Shigeru Iwakabe, and his say hi to everyone, Shigeru. Yeah, we are he's a professor at Ritsumeikan University in Osaka, Japan, and he's also the president for the for Society for Psychotherapy Research. Next, we have Professor Poormina Bhola, and she's a professor at the National Institute of Mental Health and Neurosciences in India, and she's also the current vice president for SPR-Asia. Next, we have Dr. Lan-Sze. Dr. Lan-Sze is an associate professor of practice in Hong Kong Chui University. And we have Dr. Adrian Tong. He is an assistant professor in Hong Kong Chui University. And we have also Kaori Nakamura, and she's a researcher in Ochanomizu University in Tokyo, Japan. And we have Simran Chatha. Simran is the head of Emotions Focused Therapy Institute in India, and she's also a PhD candidate in University of Strathclyde in Glasgow, Scotland, UK. And finally, we have Marina DiCorcia. She's a PhD student in Ochanomizu University in Tokyo, Japan, and she's also our representative in the communication committee in SPR. Okay, so I didn't miss anybody, right? I hope I have covered everyone. And so what we're going to do today, we came up with this idea of having this roundtable on cultural adaptation of psychotherapy because many of us were trained in the West, UK or US, or even if we are trained in Asia, a lot of the models in psychotherapy were actually developed in the West. But when we try to practice them in the local context, in let's say in Japan, in India, in Hong Kong, or other places, we find that sometimes we may need to make adjustments. And we are very interested in what kind of adjustment would be really helpful for people and what are some interesting experiences we have as practitioners when we work with people from our local context. So we are going to have that in mind as the goal of the panel today. And just a little bit about the logistics. What we are going to do is to have a list of questions. So after asking one question, I'm going to be the moderator. I'm going to ask a question, and then the panelist is going to respond. You know, there's no particular order. Whoever wants to go can go. And after the panelists have had an opportunity to, share their thoughts, then we may or may not have time for some short discussion, and then we're going to move on to the second question. All right. So I have planned to have this for about 55 minutes to an hour for this roundtable discussion, and then we're going to open the floor to the audience so we can have a bit of a discussion among everyone who is here today. And then in the last 5 minutes, we are also going to have a post-seminar survey that we have created because we really want to hear from audience members what you would like to see organize in the future in terms of research interests or topics, any particular format that you're interested, and also particular potential speakers that you would like to hear. Because Asia is really big, right? So it's not possible for us to know everybody who are doing these lines of work. But you may give us some suggestions, and hopefully we can get them lined up, and we can have more meaningful events, different kinds of events in the future. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to start. Okay, so the first question I have here is how do cultural beliefs about mental health or help seeking in your culture affect the engagement in psychotherapy and therapy outcomes? Okay, so this is talking about local cultural beliefs of the people about mental health and help seeking, and how these beliefs can affect our ability to engage people in psychotherapy, and how their cultural beliefs and our working with them can impact therapy outcomes. Okay, so anybody wants to go first?
Maybe I'll go first in that case. So, first of all, my name is Adrian. I just want to introduce myself first. As mentioned by Howard, I'm an assistant professor in Hong Kong University. One of the difficulties in providing counseling in our Hong Kong culture, it's about we being very focused in our base or dignity. So a lot of times we want to preserve our self-image in front of people. So whenever our clients come to our sessions, they want to be the one who is good enough, or who they have a lot of should or should not perspective thinkings. So whenever I need to do the therapy, I might need to observe what is the true feelings out of these clients, because they are trying to put on a face mask in front of us during therapy, especially for those who are not willing to come to counseling. As for example, there are some authority asking them to come. For example, our adolescents or children. Most of them might need to might think that they're coming to counseling is because they did something wrong. They want to show us that actually they are good enough. So they are showing one side of their self-image instead of showing the true self. Therefore, this is one of the difficulties in adapting our Western therapies in our Hong Kong context. But of course, I still have others factors that I want to share, but I just want to see if there's other speakers would like to add up on my difficulties first, and we can share a bit of our opinions before I further comment on the Hong Kong culture part.
Thank you, Adrian.
Could I?
Yeah, Marina, yeah.
Yes, thank you, Adrian. I thought I'd just talk after you because I think there's a similarity to Japanese culture. When you mentioned there's should or should not that clients maybe think about during therapy, I think something I thought about resembles something I thought about Japanese culture. So I think so. I work in a middle school and high school as a school counselor. And a lot of this is from my experience from working there. But I think especially in Japanese school life, there's a strong emphasis on correctness. I think there's often an expectation of like, this is the way one should act or should speak in this situation. And because of this, children tend to focus on what is being expected of them right now rather than what do I actually think or what do I actually feel or what do I truly want to say. And I think maybe because of that, there's a tendency to like suppress their own thoughts and feelings, which I think can it leads to them having difficult time talking about themselves during therapy sessions. And I think this is very interesting because I grew up in America for the last half of my childhood, and in my high school in the US, every student was supposed to talk for 1 hour about your life up until then and how you're gonna live your life after that. So each students were expected to speak about themselves for 1 hour straight. And I feel like this is very different from Japanese culture where they're expected to like behave the way you're supposed to instead of what you really might feel like you want to. And I think, yeah, so I think that's very similar, but also different a little bit. I don't know. I'd like to hear other people's opinion too.
Thank you, Marina. So should and should not, and that affects how people present themselves in therapy.
I just want to add on a little bit after Marina's comments. Yeah, it's very interesting that we have similar perspective as well. But at the same time, I also I identify some of the indicators to show that they are suppressing their feelings. For example, they have some contradictory thoughts or feelings. Sometimes they may still want to express their thoughts. For example, they will say, "Oh, I feel sad," blah 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 blah, and then they will say, "But there's something else that I should not have these thoughts or feelings." So this is something that related to the self-image. I should behave in certain way. That's why I need to say something in order to preserve our self-image. There are a lot of contradictory thoughts in order for us to have the difficulties to address their feelings, as they have the feelings about the feelings as well.
Judgment.
Yeah, I'd like to add, thank you. This is a very interesting discussion. I mean, and I think that I mean, Marina said in Japanese school, what's correct, what you're supposed to be saying or doing is more important than what you really feel or what you really need. And I think, I practice more emotion focused kind of work. I think that it's not all feelings that are suppressed, but especially anger in therapeutic situation. It's not supposed to be, I mean, you're not supposed to express anger in front of a doctor or a therapist. And also, it is hard for many people to express anger towards their parents because it makes them bad, unappreciative, horrible person. So, those things make it more, I mean, difficult to work with issues around abuse, some of the issues related to parent, children, kind of a child relationship as well. Maybe I'm just off, but I think that there are certain issues that become more difficult and that need more adjustment culturally here. Anyway, there are two hands.
Poormina?
So, just taking off from what Shigeru said, when I think about our therapy practice in India, of course, I'm just going to say that every therapy session is a multicultural encounter in several ways. So I would hesitate to speak about India as like a homogenized collective or like all Indians or therapy in India. But having said that, when we're talking about these contradictory pulls and pushes, I think in the ways in which I have experienced it most strongly is that the family is always in the therapy room in India, even if you're doing individual work. So what can you say? Which are the family secrets you can or should reveal? What decisions can you take as an individual, knowing that you belong, to families and communities, and there are certain norms or expectations which are implicit or explicit? I think these are the tugs and pulls I have experienced sort of much more strongly. Sometimes they're not articulated, and it takes a while for these contradictions or these pulls and pushes to come up in the therapy space as well. So that's what I wanted to sort of add on as an extension to what Shigeru was mentioning.
Mhm. Yeah, we have an audience member who wants to say something. Yeah,
Hi, Harold. Sorry, I joined it a bit late, so
no
I'm
problem.
not sure if I'm supposed to contribute or not.
Well, do you want to say something now? Sure.
If it's okay with you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I think to the point, a bit of a background about me. So I practice in India, and I specialize in trauma, and particularly developmental and childhood trauma, complex PTSD. So to the point of family and stuff. So the concept of codependency that we are taught here, in the Western, the way it's taught in the Western setting about enmeshment and stuff, that I find quite difficult to apply as is in the Indian context, because there are so many other sensibilities around, around your parents and how much they are involved in our culture, such that what Western concept would call too much involvement or enmeshment, we are used to it. We would interpret that as caring. So I often find, like, when I'm working with clients with a lot of childhood issues, to get them to think about differently about the parents, that, they didn't mean bad, but it happened. So it kind of, that getting that right, I find, is often a challenge.
Yeah, thank you. So the
Thank you.
definition of family relationship, or what is a healthy boundary can be
Yes.
different. Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
across cultures. Thank you. So
Yes.
Yeah, may I add? This is an interesting topic you brought up about codependence, because there are a lot of codependence fans in Japan. There are lots of people, I mean, but Japanese relationships tend to be very more interdependent. So the codependence is kind of a norm. Yet there are people who are really benefiting from the idea of codependence because they want to get out from it. Mhm. And it gives them a valid reasons to break out of that relationship that they don't want anymore.
Lan-Sze?
Yeah, actually, while listening to the speakers saying about the role of family also involved in the whole therapy setting, and also observe work itself also appear a lot in counseling, because I do career counseling. And I see that there's like an internalized cultural beliefs and values revolve around work, and that actually affect clients coming in, how they want to engage in psychotherapy. In the context of Hong Kong, I think if we are from Hong Kong, we can say that, right? Buying an apartment is like in our blood, right? We are internalized these kind of cultural beliefs since we were young. So I hear a lot of all this issue revolving the meaning of work as to buy an apartment. So I think this is a very culture specific beliefs and values in Hong Kong. And I see that this is oftentimes an important entry point to process with the client about the meaning of work before going into more like Western style of career counseling, like go into exploring interests first. So in Hong Kong, I feel that it's rather important, or at the beginning stage, is to ask them to reflect on, okay, why would you want to buy an apartment? And oftentimes to our surprise, a lot of Hong Kong clients were not able to answer that question when it's brought up in the counseling session. So I feel it's quite unique, and see if any people from other Asian cultures may resonate with you.
So what is the family value versus what is my own value? So there's a conflict, and
So
sometimes
family and personal, yeah.
when it is not, reflected or thought through, it's difficult to separate. But it is really separable, right? Because it's so internalized early, so it's quite difficult.
Yeah. Very strong belief, actually.
Yes.
It takes some time for them to process before being able to or willing to explore their personal interests.
Simran?
Yeah, I just wanted to add there because I find this concept of cultural scripts, I think that's what it's called, very interesting. And there's always this question, as Poormina was talking about, like we live, at least in India, in a multicultural society. What are the cultural scripts that come into the therapy session with the client, and being really open to that? And I think so some of the ones that I can think of in India kind of contributing to this was about, I think it starts off when we talk about help seeking, it starts off with the stigma in the first place to seek help. There's this, I have to be strong, I have to manage all my problems on my own, and I am, there's a whole lot of shame, sense of failure and guilt associated with help seeking in the first place. So to start off from there, when we talk about help seeking and there's the stigma, it really doesn't allow a sense of acceptance or even to acknowledge one's own problems, I think. And so I'm just kind of picking up on the themes of like how these cultural scripts impact like one's own acceptance. That's one. Of course, there's the I think the meaning associated with these. I think in our society there are these milestones. By this age, we need to do this. By this age, we have to be married. So there are those, and I'm questioning that, I think, in the therapy room. And another one was around these cultural scripts and a sense of agency, like how much of this do I see as something that's within my control, what I can do about it, to how much of this is how it is and it's never going to change. So I'm just putting this out there for discussion.
Yeah. It's really important about the cultural scripts, right? What is family? What is important? Who is in charge of my own decision, right? Agency. And also stigma. I think this is a big one. How to get people into therapy in the first place, right? We can have all these theories about therapy, what works, what doesn't work, but if people don't come in, then we don't have the opportunity to work. So this is
Sorry, I just also wanted to add, I think there's also, because of the stigma, the script of therapy about it not being, I guess, a space for growth, reflection, self-exploration. It's more like I don't want to use the word punishment, but something like you go there because you have a problem. And especially coming from an emotion-focused background, I think that's really difficult, because then the goals are more focused on, say, symptom relief. If I feel slightly better, I just want to come out of it. And I think, there's a whole lot around that, but like, I guess, what are we working on? And I think there's a whole lot of discussion we can do about that also.
Yeah. Excellent, because that is a nice transition to the next question. What are some strategies have you found effective in building rapport and trust with clients from your cultural background? We noted some stigma and difficulties in engaging clients because of the cultural scripts, what is expected or not expected of them. And so then what are some ways that as therapists you can use to build relationship with clients?
Actually, I would like to share with that. Actually, it's really relevant to what Simran mentioned about cultural script and use it as a way to engage client before they enter into the counseling room. Because I do narrative work, so I use the concept of cultural script. Like for example, on my private practice website, use that as a way to let the potential client feel that these cultural scripts speak to them. So when they feel resonated, then I feel that they are more likely and more willing to seek for professional counseling. So this is one of the way that I use it, and I found quite effective.
So in terms of how you advertise your services, or in terms of what you say, can hopefully be consistent or congruent with their content.
Right. And they can imagine, how the psychotherapy will work out if they see the cultural script and how the psychotherapy may work with their cultural script. They can imagine better how the process of psychotherapy may work.
I want to just, I don't think there's an answer, but, I just want to talk about the situation. I do see couples, international couples. Let's say, a husband is from the States and the wife is from Japan. So, and then, we all share two cultures, right? I lived in Canada, but, I'm here. They all, have experience of two cultures. And because, we are in Japan, and a lot of times both of them speak both languages. But, it's not necessarily true that I have a better rapport with, Japanese wife or Japanese husband. That sometimes culture is very secondary. Like there's some other, dimension where especially, doing a couple work, which is like emotional connection that seem to just come more naturally, and that take the, more precedence over cultural similarity or more, overt or apparent similarities. And sometimes the cultural similarities kind of inhibit, in this situation, the connection, because if the wife is Japanese and, as a therapist, I'm Japanese, she might perceive me as very traditional, old conservative man with not very good gender, ideas. So, but I don't want to say that that this question cannot be answered, but there are many ways in which that culture may come second or the third, but sometimes it could be very important. I'm sorry, maybe this wasn't a very good first answer.
No, all answers are welcome.
So I just wanted to take off from that very interesting turn that sort of Shigeru took us on. In some ways, it's always a navigation between difference and sameness. And I do agree that sameness is not necessarily a good thing. So if you're aligned culturally, I don't know that that's always good. Or the one, and that we are working towards it. So I think in some ways, I feel that before we enter into all these discussions or, all along, there's a tremendous need for self-reflection on the part of the therapist. So where are you situating yourself? Where do you feel is your sense of belongingness? or comfort? Where are you yourself feeling challenged by some of the cultural scripts, so to speak? I'm taking that from what Simran said. And I think sort of looking at that and engaging with that is very important. The other thing is also, I think, to engage with the basic concepts that we work with. So all of us in some ways will be engaging with the idea of attachment. But the way we see attachment and what is insecure attachment, what are the presentations, it can be quite varied. So it's not just, I think, about therapy techniques and their timing and the language, but also the language of our theories and the implications of our theories. Those are things that we really need to reflect on quite deeply before we just look at tweaking the techniques or how we work in the therapy room. So really, it's an ongoing and very deep sort of reflective process that all of us, I'm sure, continue to engage.
I very much agree with that. Oh, sorry, Adrian. we speak at the same time. I feel that with regard to building rapport, regardless of culture, in the end, is connecting therapist and client, right? Between therapist and client, is the connecting at the universal human experience level. I would see that this is as probably is we all agree that that's why culture will be secondary, because if you cannot connect with the client at that universal human experience level, the psychotherapy doesn't go anywhere, or it can be too technical or too focused on the cultural technique part and lose the human connection in the psychotherapy process. Yeah, thank you, Adrian.
Thank you, Dr. Pan. So I think we all agree is the connection is very important in our therapeutic bonding or alliance. But I think we all are using different kind of approach in order to build up the bonding. Either is trying to get the sameness, or even though we are not the same, we are trying to use the engagement, association, or empathetic response in order for us to engage in this therapeutic bonding. So what I'm thinking is the most important is about the present moment. If we can focus on the present relationship between me and the client, and we can notice actually what is best for our client, then maybe we can build up or develop this therapeutic bonding. For example, let's say, the client is very defensive due to our cultural scripts, as they have to behave as some kind of persons. Then maybe we can just focus on the present moment. How do you feel when you are trying to reveal yourself to me, instead of focusing on that event? Or maybe they would like to have the sense of inclusion. Then maybe we can adopt what Dr. Pan mentioned. Actually, we can focus more on how we can disclose our sameness. Or actually, there are some differences between us. How we can address their thoughts and emotions and try to explore or increase our curiosity about what they're thinking about. Maybe that's something that we can focus on. That's what I think.
Marina.
Yes, I agree with what everyone has been saying. But maybe this is because I work with minors. But I think one thing that I do when they're focused on, maybe you could call it the cultural script, but when they're focused on like what's the correct way to behave, I feel like I often have to tell them there's no right answers or wrong answers here. We're not judging you here. You can express anything you want, and all emotions are welcome here. Like I feel like I have to say that over and over, and it takes time for them to warm up to that, and then they gradually open up more. And another, I hear that like in India, there's a family, the cultural script, but I feel like in Japan, the cultural script that's pretty dominant is you should consider other people's feelings over yours. Like if someone says, "Oh, I'm angry," the teacher would come in and say like, okay, but if you express that, how would the other person feel? The other person would feel sad. So you should empathize with that sadness and not express your anger. And I feel like that over time, like their emotion gets mixed up with what's my emotion and what's other people's emotion. And they are not very sure what their emotion is. So I feel like at the beginning of the therapy, you kind of have to start with like distinguishing that, or like finding boundaries between, okay, this is your emotion and this is what you've internalized from other people's or from the culture. And then after you're able to set the boundary, then they can express their anger or their sadness. Yeah.
Yeah, after when you said that, I thought about, cultural script and also the therapy script, right? So what is expected in the therapy room and what we are, encouraging, at least, in a way that hopefully will help them express their emotions a bit more openly, and separate what is mine versus others, so that there's a, not to say that that is the goal, but actually it can help them to feel a little more agency in terms of ability to express themselves. In terms of the therapy script in my culture, sometimes I also talk about in the very first session, explain what is therapy. I'm not here to give you very direct advice, or I'm not this, wise guru and give out all this advice, but in terms of helping the process to along, help you make decisions that feels right to you. I think that sometimes it helps clients to have a more realistic expectation of what therapy is and what I can do.
Like,
Yeah, Simran.
yeah, okay. Yeah, I just wanted to add to that a little bit. Like I'm thinking of too many things, so I'm just trying to organize my thoughts here. And the discussion's very interesting. So I think one thing that I'm kind of holding on to is that it's very much dependent on how both the therapist and the client sort of work towards navigating these scripts. And what everybody talked about earlier was about, say, like my own script about my own cultural background as a therapist, or the client's cultural script about their background, how that can influence the therapy process. And maybe have biases maybe against the therapist or towards the client. So the first thing that I sort of come back to, especially coming from a person-centered therapy, is like Roger's core conditions, offering an empathic, and I think Adrian was talking about that, offering an empathic presence, having unconditional positive regard, genuineness, maybe even transparency. And I think transparency is really important for formulating goals and tasks in the beginning of therapy to set the expectations for the therapy script. So I think that kind of ties in to that. I also just wanted to add maybe a couple more things, because we talked about family, and often in India, if there's a situation that the client is forced into therapy by the family members or by doctors from different, specialities, they come in with a strong belief that therapy is not going to work. I think one thing that I found really interesting that's written about, I'm sure in EFT, but also in other therapy approaches, is about addressing it actively as an early alliance difficulty. And this is like almost like a marker for early alliance difficulty. And then you sort of just focus on the relationship before you can collaborate on the tasks. And I think offering like a more friendly, non-controlling, non-expert position, being really explicit about, I think, what the client is feeling. I know you don't want to be here, but here we are, sort of thing. and being more open and curious and giving them that agency of it's okay if you don't want to use this space, but if you want to, I'm here to talk about it. I think that really helps. So I just wanted to add that. Additionally, I wanted to also say that using the same language somewhere also helps to talk about, the same culture, the sameness, but sometimes I've seen just the familiarity can help establish a whole lot of safety for some people. So just want to put that out there. Yeah.
Thank you, Simran. Shigeru, you had a thought just now?
Me?
Yeah.
No. Oh, yeah. I mean, Simran and Marina brought a very important point. I think that here there's a kind of a clash of culture as well. In the Japanese society, in the schools, they teach anger is not good. Think about how other people feel. Because it's, and also the kind of implicit message being that anger is bad and hurt other people. And then in therapy, we are, we want to welcome all kinds of feelings and, not all anger is bad. And, not only that, I think that in some ways we are teaching anger is a part of your, agency and, telling people to, like inviting them to learn to express it. And, in a more socially acceptable manner, being assertive, but sometimes being assertive in Japanese society gets you into trouble as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there are some very important things, around this ideology of, what's socially acceptable to feel.
Yeah. Socially acceptable, and also what we consider when we take the different actions. I think in Chinese culture, also in terms of, let's say, for example, career counseling. In the West, there's a lot of focus on interest, but in the Chinese culture, there may be concerns about what my family think about what I choose to do. And so if we do not take that into consideration, based on the Western theories, we are missing a very important part, because the harmonious and being able to, fit in well with the family and sit well with the family is also part of mental health too. Being too challenging in the family can be difficult.
And the question is really like where and how do you decide, how do you work through those two, conflicting or opposing positions?
Yeah, there's no easy answer, but at least I think bringing some awareness will be important in the therapy room, that these are the things that I consider. So for example, one concrete example is, for example, I may ask my client, what does your family think about your decision to go into this particular career path, to see how they respond, and if that is, creating another layer of conflict or contributing to their difficulties in mental health. I think that's important to address. I'm not implying that they should think about what their family think, but at the same time, just think about the family dynamics and how that may play out in the overall picture. Poormina.
So, taking off from what you were saying, I think just bringing it into conversation, naming it very early, putting it on the table, I think that's probably one way that we can get started. And the other thing is perhaps, for the therapist to have that not knowing stance, that I'm interested, but I don't know it all. So that we have a chance to engage with whatever the person is bringing, rather than having preconceived notions about culture or cultural beliefs or, because I find, India is very diverse nation. There are so many intersections. And so along with looking at culture, I think it's important to take an intersectional lens as well. So the person may be Indian overall, but there can be intersections of class, caste, gender, educational level, the language spoken, all sorts of aspects that enter alongside. So in a sense, I'm saying it can be quite comforting to have this preconceived notion of, okay, this is how I need to operate in this culture, but actually you can never really be prepared. And having that degree of preparation can be a negative sometimes if we're not open enough to. And along with that, there's also the aspect that culture is constantly changing. It's so dynamic. And then there are so many people that we see who are in between cultures, like Shigeru was also mentioning, different combinations, different, there's been displacement, there's been migration, there's been, marriage, which is forming different cultural diets. So I think keeping all that in mind, it's really difficult and perhaps not very helpful to have a very sort of set notion of how one will operate in a particular culture. So, I think those are the joys of psychotherapy practice, right? You can never get too comfortable.
Yeah, the idea of adaptation, I think in the literature, there's some challenge to this cultural adaptation versus personalization, because, we shouldn't assume that people from one culture all behave the same. And so, as, Poormina mentioned, as changing cultures, there's people who are, affiliated with cultures in different cultures because of the immigration history or, the relationship with different cultural groups, and also in terms of intersectionality. So these are really, really good reminders for us as well. So moving on to the next question, any particular challenge that you have encountered in working with people in your own culture, that you'll be comfortable with sharing and can see what others have to say? Any practical challenges when you're trying to do work in your culture? Adrian.
Start first. Yeah, thank you. So because we mentioned a lot about the cultural script or family script, right? And my focus is about acceptance and commitment therapy. In ACT, there's one important factors is that if we are pursuing our own values, so it's actually quite an individualism's perspective. If we in ACT, if we mention that if we are not pursuing our values in our life, we will be inflexible, which induce our stress and anxiety. But at the same time, when we're trying to help our clients in order to pursue their own values, it might be contradictory to our family script or family norms or social norms that actually increases our sense of guilt. I forgot who mentioned that too, because earlier I think one of our speakers mentioned a sense of guilt too. And that is something that is very important in our therapy. But at the same time, when we're trying to do a cultural adaptations regarding X, it seems like we should bear in mind that actually cultural or collective goals is also important in consolidating our values instead of just focusing on ourselves. That's something that I think is specifically affects our Chinese culture.
Yeah, in terms of the how much do you advocate, or the clients have their own values versus I don't know, considering the family values too?
Yeah. So I actually when we talk about their own values, I specifically not trying to convince them or to facilitate them how they can achieve their own value first. I would try to focus on how their own values contradict to the family values and how they perceive it, how they feel about it. And so there's actually an extra steps in doing X because we are trying to process not only about their own personal values, but also the contradictory parts between them and their family members or the expectation from others, the companies, the schools, any other collective factors that we need to consider. So instead of after knowing their values, instead of focusing on how to intervene or how to increase their committed actions in order to pursue their values, we have to know more about their feelings of these contradictory things, and then let them process about these feelings, how they can prioritize which is more important to them. Then we can decide what is our committed actions. What goal we should be taking in maybe we should accommodate both kind of goals in order to have integrated goals in order for us to be more psychological flexible in the sense of acceptance and commitment therapy.
So it sounds like in a collectivist culture, there may be an extra step when we are trying to apply this model to take into consideration, whether parts of our values contradicts with the, people who are close to us.
Yeah, that's correct. Although there is not much research on it, I'm trying to build right now.
That's why we have SPR-Asia really to maybe collaborate and look at some of these things that is quite unique in our culture.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, feel free to contact me if you have interest in this area.
Sure. Yes.
I can go next.
Yes, Simran.
Yeah, I find this really interesting because Adrian, you're talking about it in the form of values. I think in EFT we talk about it in terms of emotional needs. I think, and a lot of times we reach this point where the client knows what they need, but that's very different from what the family expects out of them. And then there's this, I guess, I think, we could call it additional steps, but there's this sort of process of negotiation that comes up. And I think it's really, in experiential work, when we do chair work, there's almost like additional steps to negotiate or to talk about, because this is the background, this is what my family wants from me, but this is what I need. Then how do I assimilate or integrate that within myself? How much am I okay to let go of? And then I think there's a process of grieving around letting go or acceptance that also kind of comes into the therapy process, which is not researched, not talked about much at all. And I think that's really important to talk about. So yeah, I just wanted to add to that. Additionally, I heard about Japanese culture and expression of anger, and I think especially for this section, I had made a note about expression of anger even in Indian culture. And so there are these almost additional steps again to build up experiential work that I end up doing. It's almost like a helpful step to remind the client that if it's unfinished business with a parent, for instance, that the parent's actually not there in the session. It's okay to talk about it. It's okay because we're trying to explore your feelings, your understandings, help you fully express how it works for you. And obviously, additionally also affirm that, of course, they didn't mean any harm. Of course, they were doing their best. Of course, they had good intentions, and kind of keep that probably the script in mind that, we must always respect elders is another one, I think, or our parents specifically. So that, and I think I'm just talking kind of overlapping things about guilt also that we just recently talked about. So just put it out there.
Yeah, negotiating and letting go, or almost grieving some of the things that we let go because of the conflicting needs. Marina.
When Simran mentioned, like, you would explain to the clients, we're working with your emotion. I think in Japan we also need to do that, but I feel like there's a difficulty about language, and I really want to hear how it is in like Chinese or Hindi or any other languages. But in Japanese, we don't use many subjects. We don't say like you or I as much, and also there's not much directionality in our sentences. So I think in EFT, sometimes a therapist would say I'm angry. But in Japanese, it's really awkward to say I'm angry. Like, 私は怒ってる doesn't sound right. And instead, it's more comfortable to say upset, like upset. And there's no I mean, it's implied that the upsetness belongs to you, but we don't say I'm upset. Like, we just say upset, 腹が立ってる. Or like sometimes in EFT, the therapist might say like, can you tell her like you're angry at her? Like, I'm angry at you. In Japanese, we don't, that sounds really awkward, this directionality that this anger is directed towards you. Like, that's too much. And we would just say like 怒ってる, which directly translates to angry. You just say angry, and it's this emotion is just there. And I think there's a hesitation amongst Japanese people in directing it at someone. And that shows in the language too. And so there's a practical difficulty with like doing EFT in Japanese. I'm wondering like how it is with other languages too.
Actually, yeah, thanks, Marina, for bringing this up. I would like to follow up on that and expand on probably linking to psychotherapy training. Because in Hong Kong, at the undergraduate and postgraduate level, it's taught in English. We use English textbook. And sometimes when it's actually quite similar between Hong Kong and Macau. So we've found that students having difficulty to translate the term like depression or some of the micro skills language into Cantonese. So this is often what I heard from students, and oftentimes they have to write reflection papers in English. So it seems like a different selves instead of the Cantonese selves. So I think this is a very unique part in terms of language, not just in as you say, in the psychotherapy room, but connecting to how we train our local students. Because not just the concept, Western, but the language is English, Western mindset. So it often takes a lot of time for students to, for example, practicing micro skills, how they can, for example, reading the books about examples of how do you do reflection feeling, but how do you translate that in Cantonese that doesn't sound awkward or weird. So I just thought about that may be something quite similar in our Asian culture, how we use our own language, but doesn't lose the essence or original concept of those psychotherapy concepts.
Yeah, I think it is a really interesting when you have textbooks in English, but then we practice in another language. Maybe it is a good time. I'm noticing the time is 1:30 in Hong Kong. So we have about 30 minutes left, and maybe it's a good time to open the floor up to everybody, especially when we are talking about language. People have very experienced with training and learning psychotherapy in one language and then maybe practicing in another language. So maybe we'll open this up to everybody if you want to have a further discussion. The panelists, feel free to start first.
Yeah, I think this is interesting also. Another issue, in Japanese, Marina said we don't say I or you, but also depending on the sort of the hierarchical relationship, you use a politer form of language, which makes the therapeutic relationship very formal and difficult for you to feel naturally yourself. I don't know if how much you do this in another language, but in Japanese, this is like one linguistic obstacle to more natural communication in therapy, for sure.
Poormina.
So I think in some way the use of this language where you speak in a more respectful way depending on age or other hierarchies, I think it also reflects in some ways what the therapeutic relationship is conceptualized as. It's when you read in the Western textbooks the way the therapist and the client may speak with each other or how you might address each other by first names, that is not workable, let's say, that easily or uniformly, let's say, in the Indian context. It would be quite only in certain urban contexts and in certain sort of combination of therapists and clients can that happen, that the client will refer to the therapist by first name or in a more informal way. So that is sort of built into the way the social structure of relationships in society and then even the therapeutic relationship. So if you're going to work to create a different relationship, it's not just a shift in language, but the shift in the overall, I don't know, the structure of society. And you have to create a new therapy culture, right? So you create that new therapy culture and then you see how you're going to use language or other aspects. And sometimes you will do that and sometimes you will realize that the social structure is so deeply embedded that you don't want to mess with that. You leave that be, but you'll work around that to create, yeah, it's now that we're talking about it, I'm thinking it's quite complex and it's quite different depending on therapist-client dyad, even within the same culture. I can see Simran nodding a little bit, so I'm thinking,
I also wanted to add a little bit and respond to Marina about just to share about my experience practicing EFT in India. So for a really long time, I think I had the privilege to do that. I only used EFT in English. So, and I think I did try. So when I would try to use it in Hindi, I would switch between English and Hindi. And I would often notice that there are some things that I can only find myself to be able to speak in English. Otherwise, I will freeze in the session. So I think that that was very interesting for me, and also in many ways challenging, created a block in some sense. But it's also interesting. I wanted to say that because now it's been about almost 5 years I've been using EFT, maybe more. And over the past 1 year, I've become more and more comfortable speaking in Hindi. And if I have to, because I was just right now trying to reflect on what is different. And I think there's something about the process within myself that I'm not necessarily trying to translate the English to Hindi anymore in my mind. And I'm just trying to be myself resonate with the client and have a conversation. And there's something about internalizing, I guess, EFT, or I know even AEDP, in terms of these therapist responses are almost like interventions to be able to deepen the emotional process. And I think over time, somehow you internalize it. I have to go back and check the recordings in Hindi now that you're asking me, but that's what I was thinking, and very curious to know about others.
Yeah, and it is very cultural too. I really resonated because sometimes when we try to push for a more collaborative relationship in the room, but the client really resists that, right? So I'm not going to force my client to call me by my first name if they prefer me to call by Dr. So and so. Right? So um, it's something like I think Poormina was mentioning that we can't really change the rubric of the society or the structure of relationships too much. But at the same time, how can we use what we know about psychotherapy in a room that is going to be helpful to the clients? I'll say, for example, immediacy. I'm trying to teach immediacy in the Chinese context, but saying that I'm feeling close to you feels too much in Chinese. So, or maybe it's personality. I don't know. Maybe it's a mix of culture and personality. Yeah. We have a question from Brazil. Samuel, do you want to say something about your question? I can also read it if you prefer.
Oh, oh, of course. Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, my question was motivated because actually in Brazil, when we are thinking about psychotherapy, actually psychotherapy has become pretty famous in the last decades. But we know at the same time that it is possible to say that there are other kinds of therapy, like cultural ways of dealing with the suffering. For example, Brazil is a really religious country, and for this, it's common to deal with suffering, going to the church or within the community. So sometimes I feel that there's individualistic emphasis in psychotherapy in the way of dealing with suffering, that if there's no cultural sensitivity, I believe that this can ignore this community phenomena or collective phenomena that is important as well. So I was thinking about other cultures, and mainly cultures which psychology is seen as something external, how we can insert and be involved with psychology, considering that we have particular ways of dealing with suffer. For example, I am particularly curious about how Japanese culture has its own therapy in the way of dealing with suffering within the community, within the collective. So, yeah, that's it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Any thoughts? I think there is really a need for therapist self-reflection of how we may, because of the time we invested in studying, because of our own, decision to go into psychology, that there may be some biases against more traditional practices or religious practices. And some of these can be, I won't say detrimental, but sometimes can really influence how we see or, or not advocate for traditional practices. So I think this is something that came to mind. I'm just recalling in a personal growth class that I teach in counseling, and these are all first year counselor students. And when people talk about using religious practice and praying, and I realized myself have some hesitation. But I also try to remind myself that, okay, these are the core beliefs of my students. And if I, choose not to respect or choose not to, or become too heavy-handed. Okay, let's talk about counseling. Let's talk about how we see this from a psychological point of view. Then I may be missing a huge part of the humanness and my ability to connect with my students. So I think this came to mind immediately about therapist biases. Yeah, I just want to hear what
I just thought about in Hong Kong, I don't know, Harold or Adrian might have experienced a client we mentioned about fortune telling.
Yeah.
They went to fortune telling and they look at their life or someone predict their life and all these things and then they brought into the psychotherapy room. Yeah, and how therapists feel about that. Yeah, I just found that quite unique in Hong Kong Chinese culture.
Yeah.
I just want to say in Japan, like there are fortune tellers, and I hear that a lot of people would rather go to a fortune teller before going to account.
Yeah, yes, yeah. They brought in the results, right? Fortune telling results into the counseling room. Yeah.
Yeah. Poormina?
So I think that if we're going to sort of dwell on embracing traditional healing practices, it also means perhaps that we need to look at psychotherapy very differently, because the therapy room is very distant from the community. So maybe then we have to think about how therapy works like closer within the community. That's one thing. And so that's also sort of challenging our traditional notions of how therapy works. The other thing I wanted to speak about briefly is because I think some people in the room today might be interested, that there's a program called the Dawa Dua project, okay, which translates into like medicine, which is like more like modern medicine, and Dua, which is sort of offering, I'm not getting the exact translation, but it's a way of integrating the traditional healing practices, or where you offer prayer or you seek divine guidance. So it is situated in shrines or close to shrines where people go for traditional healing. So there's also the availability of these, the more modern psychiatric or psychological treatments that are available. And there's a close connection with the traditional healers. So more a collaborative approach. So it works together rather than in competition. And it's actually been on for a couple of decades now and been quite successful. So not a complete answer, but one way of sort of building bridges and connecting between the two.
I just want to add on another perspective. For psychotherapy, I'm not sure how you all perceive psychotherapy. To me, actually, psychotherapy is just a mindset. It's not really about all those techniques, or if I'm following the structure or the protocols of the therapy. It's actually a mindset. So, for example, using acceptance and commitment therapy, and I mentioned about values as very important factors in ACT, right? So the essence is if we are pursuing and committing to pursue our values, but this kind of values doesn't have to be individuals, right? I can be integrated to a collective goals as well. So when I trying to use ACT as the therapeutic tools, I'm not trying to implement, I should have done this metaphor, I should have done these techniques. I just focus on how I can improve their psychological flexibility, which is the underlying mechanism of ACT. So in that sense, if I'm just focusing on the psychological flexibility, and we mentioned about not knowing stance before. So if we can apply that not knowing sense, I'm not trying to frame that what kind of values is value. We are just trying to focus on the clients, what kind of values that they think that is more suitable for them. Then actually I'm still adhering acceptance and commitment therapy, but at the same time, it's also culturally adapted. I'm not sure if that answered the question too, but yeah, maybe a little bit abstract.
Well, the therapists need to be flexible too. So, yeah. Shigeru.
Yeah, maybe I'm just going off the topic, but I mean about what's considered culturally, I mean healing in one particular culture. I think I kind of remember about this client who said a male client who never gets a date, but he paid a lot of money for therapy and he felt more confident about himself, and he said he couldn't have gotten confidence buying a car with the money he paid for therapy, right? If he bought a car, he still would have been without confidence. But I still kind of question, that conclusion, because maybe if he has gotten a car, he would go out more. He would meet different people. Um, he will meet people who like the car, and the conversation, he will not be so interpersonally awkward because he can talk about the cars, whatever. But what I'm saying is that we don't have, many of us are not so into traditional healing, but into very everyday consumerist healings. And that are very strong, I think, in case of Japan. That if people want to be happy, they wouldn't think about the therapy. They would go Disneyland or go out with friends. But that, strengthen their tie with their friends. It's a behavioral activation in some way. I think that this issue about promoting psychotherapy, we really need to look at what we do everyday lives, right? What gives us pleasure and distraction, but also some of the healing experiences that are very much like behavioral activations or building interpersonal relationship through these activities, because these activities may not be so potent, but provide the opportunity to connect with other people and have positive emotions. I'm not
Yeah,
sure if this is, my take on it.
I heard of people rather spend the money on gym membership and go to the gym, and rather than going to psychotherapy, they feel like they can look better, they can, start pumping irons, and yeah. So we have a couple of questions in the chat box. So the first one from India. In order to achieve better cultural competency as therapists, what are the elements or aspects that we need to focus on in our training, other than understanding varied cultural beliefs and language-specific variables? Any thoughts about elements to incorporate to training?
I think it's therapist cultural awareness and self-awareness. This is a very important part.
Yeah.
Understand how they are as a cultural being, reflect on themselves first as a cultural being. Any internalized values, how they see themselves in terms of different selves, like the gender selves, SES, etc. And then going forward in terms of working with the client, that will increase their cultural sensitivities during the psychotherapy. So I feel that it's less on knowledge. There's a textbook about that, but I feel that it's more important about the therapist's self-awareness in terms of who they are and how they present themselves as a cultural being first, and then a therapist next. So see if others have any other thoughts about that.
So I absolutely resonate with the idea of self-reflection as really key in training. And I think if I speak for India, I don't think it's sort of integrated as a very key professional competency yet. I think the interest in therapists' reflective work is increasing, but maybe it needs to be integrated into the training framework. Having said that, I think there's also something to be thought about in terms of the curriculum itself. What are the books we are reading? What is the, what is the structure of training itself? And I think this whole movement towards decolonization of training and material and processes is an important one. Having said that, I think it's important, again, not to have these strong divisions, like West versus the rest or West versus the East. And I sometimes see, if I'm speaking about India, that there's a movement towards Indianizing the curriculum, like making it culturally relevant. But sometimes then it can become too much a rush in the other direction. Or the look at Indianizing the curriculum is then only certain things speak for India, but India is very diverse. So even within that, you can be kind of doing a disservice or some injustice, where not all of India is represented in all of its diversity in terms of whether it's religion or whether it's caste or whether it's any of these other aspects of so I think this has to be done with a lot of sensitivity and a lot of thought, and not in a very reactionary sort of way to cleanse the curriculum and build some, magically new ones.
Adrian.
Thank you. So maybe I add on another perspective on training as well. So other than improving our self-awareness about our feelings, our past experience, and other kind of things, maybe we can also improve our micro skills. For example, our non-verbal observations, and how or not only about non-verbal. For example, verbal tracking skills. How we can identify different wordings from our clients to know more about their perspective. And we mentioned about language, right? We might have some assumptions on different kind of wordings, even though maybe we are using same languages because or we are using same words, but our feelings towards these words might not be the same. So if we can learn more how we can integrate the feelings when the clients are saying those kinds of words instead of how we analyze these words is also very important for the cultural adaptation. It's because it helps for us to stay with the not knowing stance, because we are just really focusing on how to feel the client's feeling instead of how we analyze their wordings.
Yeah, I really resonate with that because I was trained in the US, and then when I came back to teach in Hong Kong, there was a steep learning curve about how to express and talk about emotions in Cantonese. And so some of the nuances weren't really picked up until my second or third year or fourth year onward in Hong Kong. And I think this is something that we as a cultural being need to be more sensitive towards what each word means. Yeah, Simran.
Yeah, just quickly to add to that, I find it really interesting how we can add I think in EFT what we're calling situated empathy, like empathy for the client from where they come from, because there's so much now emphasis on the moment-to-moment process in the session. I think it's important to emphasize that, and there's a way to do it in training, which we call embodying your own client. So be your client and speak as your client, sometimes to your supervisor. And I find that extremely useful. So I just wanted to add.
Yeah, thank you. So we are about 5 minutes towards the hour, to the end of the roundtable. So I have posted a post-seminar survey while we are continuing to have a discussion on the last question. For the audience, if you are interested, please fill out the survey so that we can get some feedback on today's roundtable, as well as get some ideas for future events, topics, speakers, formats. Okay. So the last question we have here is, how can we differentiate which elements of psychotherapy require cultural adaptation, and which aspects are inherently therapeutic or corrective. Considering that psychotherapy dialogue is distinct from social conversation, how do we determine what should be adjusted for cultural relevance and what should remain consistent with therapeutic integrity? So really sort of a wrap up of the today, right? What is to be adaptive? What is supposed to be personalized? What is something that how do we adjust ourselves really?
I feel that this is because this is a very, very good question, and it's often in my mind as a practitioner. I feel that it is an ongoing reflective work. It's not a one way, or you can do all the adaptation at one point. It's an ongoing process, but I found that having a very core principle is the therapist herself or himself has to really know the philosophical aspect of the psychotherapy first, because if not well understood, the adaptation can get the psychotherapy derailed from the original psychotherapy philosophy. So the therapeutic integrity is something that you have to, I think, therapists to reflect on and then keep applying with your client, and then do a lot of all this micro level adjustment, I would say, rather than adaptation, in order how to effectively apply in your local context. So I feel that it's not something that we can just plug in and say, this is how you should adapt a psychotherapy model, but it is a very practical aspect. I feel that it's a therapist's ongoing self-reflective work as well.
Thank you. Any other thoughts? It's such a broad topic. When I was preparing, I was looking up, what does the literature say, and but there's no clear answer. Like all aspects of culture, there's no clear answer. Some would advocate for more personalization. Some would say it is really difficult to have one, culturally adapted version of a therapy because, by itself, we need a lot of numbers to test that, or what is adapted may work for some people but not work for others. So it is not an easy thing to pinpoint. But I think overall, what I'm hearing, what I got from today is a lot of self-reflection, therapists, the cultural being, and also sensitivity to the different nuances in the culture, including intersectionality, including the changing times and how people can have different, elements of culture in them because of their own history, and also in terms of flexibility. That's what I learned about today, incorporating the traditional healing and being open to the different kinds of healing practices that are offered within our own culture. Any other thoughts? If not, then I think we have come to the end of our roundtable today. And for those who have not been able to do the post-seminar survey, I'm going to send it to the audience members as well. But if you can, quickly click onto that, then you can fill it up and really give us some ideas of what we can do in the future. Okay, so it's 2 p.m. my time in Hong Kong, and thank you so much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you in other SPR-Asia events as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.